3 weeks after he retired, David Walker received a letter that made absolutely no sense. A letter claiming he had lost nearly half of his retirement savings, not in a market crash, not from a scammer, not from identity theft, but because of a man he trusted more than almost anyone, his financial advisor. The same advisor who had attended family barbecues. The same advisor who had shaken his hand every year for 17 years. The same advisor who once told him,
"David, don't worry. Your future is secure."
Except it wasn't. And by the time David realized what was happening, the damage had already been done. Tonight, we're telling the story of a retired engineer who thought he did everything right, until one ordinary envelope revealed a betrayal that had been growing quietly for years. And if you're retired, or planning to retire, this story may be one of the most important warnings you'll ever hear. Because the danger didn't begin with a bad investment, it began with trust. David Walker was 67. His wife, Linda, was 64. They lived outside Columbus, Ohio, a modest home, no debt, 2 grown children, a quiet life. For decades, David worked as an industrial engineer. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't greedy. He saved consistently, month after month, year after year. And nearly every major financial decision went through one person, Michael Carter, their advisor. Michael had the perfect image, expensive suit, warm smile, firm handshake. He remembered birthdays, asked about grandchildren, sent holiday cards, the kind of person people naturally trusted. Linda often joked,
"Michael knows more about our money than we do."
Nobody laughed harder than Michael. And that's what made what happened next so dangerous. Because betrayal rarely arrives wearing a warning sign. Sometimes it arrives carrying a smile. A year before retirement, David noticed something odd. Their account balance wasn't growing the way he expected. Not declining, just lagging. At first, he blamed the market. Most people would. So he asked Michael. The answer came immediately.
"Markets are complicated right now. Stay patient. Long-term thinking wins."
Reasonable, comforting, professional. David accepted it. But a few months later, their son, Jason, asked a simple question during dinner.
"Dad, what's your annual fee?"
Silence. David looked at Linda. Linda looked at David. Neither knew. It was the first time anyone had ever asked, and strangely, neither had an answer. A tiny moment, almost forgettable. Yet years later, David would replay that conversation over and over, because that question opened a door, and behind that door was something neither of them expected. The next week, David requested detailed statements, not summaries. Everything. Every fee, every transaction, every recommendation. The paperwork arrived in a thick envelope. At first, nothing looked alarming. Pages, charts, disclosures, financial language, the kind most people skim. Then David noticed something. One fee, then another, then another. Different names, different descriptions, different percentages, all pulling money from the same accounts. Individually, they looked harmless. Together, they told a very different story. And the deeper David looked, the more uncomfortable he became. Because suddenly he wasn't asking, how much have we earned? He was asking, how much have we lost? David called his daughter Sarah, an accountant, practical, methodical, not emotional. Exactly who he needed. For 2 weekends, they sat at the dining room table, statements everywhere, coffee growing cold, highlighters covering the pages, and slowly a pattern emerged. products repeatedly recommended, investments constantly switched, fees layered on top of fees. Nothing looked illegal. That's what shocked them most. Every document had signatures, disclosures, approvals, technical compliance. Yet something still felt wrong, because every recommendation seemed to benefit one person more than anyone else, Michael, the advisor. And once Sarah noticed it, she couldn't stop seeing it.
David scheduled a meeting. Same office, same chairs, same coffee machine, same smile. But this time, everything felt different. David placed the documents on the desk. Michael's smile faded, just slightly, enough to notice. David asked one question.
How much have we paid you over the years?
Silence. A long silence, the kind that changes a room. Michael eventually answered, but not directly. Instead, he talked about markets, complexity, risk management, long-term strategy, everything except the number. And that was the moment David knew something was very wrong.
Weeks later, Sarah completed the calculations. David still remembers the number. Exactly. Because some numbers burn themselves into memory. Over 17 years, fees and commissions had quietly consumed hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money that could have remained invested. Money that could have generated income. Money they believed was still working for them. The realization hit Linda hardest, not because of the money, because of the relationship. She trusted him. They trusted him. And trust has a value that's impossible to calculate until it's broken. For several days, David barely slept. He wasn't angry, not at first. He was embarrassed. How could an engineer who spent his life solving problems miss this? How could two intelligent adults overlook something for 17 years? The answer was painful, because they stopped verifying and started believing. Trust became autopilot. Questions became unnecessary. And over time, the relationship replaced accountability. That's how many financial disasters begin, not with greed, not with stupidity, but with comfort. Eventually, David and Linda moved their accounts, created a simpler plan, learned what they actually owned, learned what they were paying, learned which questions to ask. The recovery wasn't instant. Some losses couldn't be reversed. But something important changed. They became active participants again, not passengers. And that shift restored something money couldn't: confidence. The confidence that comes from understanding rather than assuming. Today, David says the hardest part wasn't losing money. It was discovering that trust alone isn't a financial strategy. Most people imagine financial danger arriving as a scam call, a hacker, a criminal, a stranger. But sometimes, the greatest risk is assuming someone else is watching everything for you. Because even good people make mistakes. Even trusted professionals have incentives. And every retirement account deserves curiosity, not blind faith. David and Linda still enjoy retirement. They still travel. They still spend time with family. But they ask more questions now. A lot more. And if their story leaves us with one lesson, it's this: the person managing your future should never be beyond your understanding, because the day you stop asking questions may be the day the real risk begins. If this story made you think about someone you trust with your finances, or reminded you of a lesson you've learned the hard way, share your thoughts below. Your experience might help someone avoid the same mistake. And sometimes, one question asked at the right moment can change an entire retirement.